Hello friends! As you can see, I'm back in my little goblin dungeon, back in Singapore after the Hong Kong DLC. As for the Hong Kong DLC, it didn't go so well for me, but that's okay, you know? Still had a blast, met a lot of cool people, and we'll just keep pushing on, grinding towards the next competition, the next event, trying to get better. That's the name of the game here at Quest for 2, so that's what I'm going to do. But this video isn't about my tournament failures, it's about Winterspell. It's basically almost already here. The cards have entirely been spoiled. People have been playtesting online. A lot of new decks and new ideas are out there, and we can kind of have an early sense as to how this metagame in Core Constructed is going to shake up with the addition of the Winterspell cards. So far, the early talk of the town is the addition of many new tools for Amber. Aggro specifically, but also for a grindier mid-range style of deck, specifically the Lilo and Stitch stuff. The early lists we have been seeing have put them into the existing Dogs deck to form a fairly potent aggro engine. I have a list put up right here. I'm moving so that I have space on the screen to put up the list from Mo Shamblin, which is basically Dogs with the addition of Stitch and Lilo. Lilo Snow Artist being an improvement over Lady Family Dog basically, and Stitch Naughty Experiment being a way that you can shift up into Stitch Rockstar to give your deck some more grinding power. There's also the addition of, Pudge controls the weather, which is, if you have a Lilo in play, a free card that you can use to power out Tramp a bit faster because, you know, you play one more additional character for free. It also can quest by itself to put on more lore pressure. And it also, if it's played for free with Stitch Rockstar on board, you can just exert this free Pudge and draw a card just like that, and that's really high value. Of course, we can't forget that Grandmother Willow is a big player in what makes Amber so good now. It's essentially Lantern on a stick. It's a character, so it helps out your tramps. It's a character so that it can quest, and you can also use it on the turn that it comes into play immediately, which is fantastic. And since Dogs is not a deck that wants to ink that much anyway, having a rampy character essentially like Grandmother Willow that serves every single function that the deck wants is just fantastic. Of course, this is just one list. It excludes a new card from Winterspell that's also kind of the talk of the town, Mulan Resourceful Recruit. Mulan is of course fantastic with Tramp Enterprising Dog from previous sets because you can, you know, give it additional strength and it quests for like 1 million, which is great in a aggressive deck. Of course, this is just Amber Emerald Dogs. There's also Amber Steel Aggro. I don't really have a list for you, but cards that I've seen people trying are the new Lilo, because it's difficult to remove as a 2-quester, and also Angel, which you can play early if you're going second to sing Strength of the Raging Fire to remove your opponent's 2-drop to protect your questing characters. And of course, the usual game plan, you refill with Doc and you just play a whole bunch of quick questers and win the game quickly from there. Oh, of course, we also can't forget the Steel 4-drop Angel as well, which is great in a deck that's trying to push lore quickly because you can discard your cards to deal 2 damage to things for free, fire the cannons for free essentially, which is great, and of course doubles really well with Doc. So is aggro going to be taking over the metagame? Well, in my view, I don't think so. First of all, it's early in the development of the Winterspell meta, which, you know, early in any metagame, aggro decks are the easiest to start building around, to start trying new cards in because they're the easiest cards to evaluate. So of course, you're going to see a lot more aggro. From what I can see from my playtesting, I think that both Amber Steel and Dogs are quite beatable even with the new tools. Even though these decks can perhaps accelerate a little bit faster with Grandmother Willow and maybe grind a little bit better with the new Winterspell tools like the Stitch that enables the Stitch shift line, Lilo Rockstar as well as a possible card to be played, even though we haven't seen it that much yet. The smallest 5-cost Stitch. It does look like Amber that's building for all-out aggro is beatable in the same way that was beatable in previous formats. It's so beatable in fact that people actually have been trying out all sorts of mid-range and control decks as well. All your usual Amethyst mid-range decks are still around, Purple Steel and Blurple. There's also new hard control decks like Amber Sapphire that plays Raging Storm along with a whole bunch of princesses, so you can ramp up your ink quite aggressively to land the Raging Storm early. It plays Hades for removal, Let It Go for removal, Stitch 7 to refill its hand and also act as a body to trade into something, so you can draw a whole bunch of cards with Ohana Means Family. Another new mid-range deck that people are trying is Amber Ruby. It uses a bunch of damaged characters, including, I believe, Facho, which is a new one from Winterspell, along with Ruben. So you can accelerate out 5 drops quickly, like your Headless Horseman that we know, or like the new Stitch, for example. Also plays Grandmother Willow, of course. It just aims to control the board with characters, draw cards using said characters, perhaps Ohana Means Family to add additional cards. I think they go all the way up to Stitch 7 and Maleficent Dragon as well. So that's another cool deck to look out for. But the deck that I've been testing and finding some success with and spending a lot of time trying to refine is Ruby-Sapphire. Now, this won't be the first Ruby-Sapphire list that you see. I think Inkwell Gaming has posted one. I Am So Cutie has posted his own list as well. I'm going to put links to those in the comments if you haven't seen them. Go and check them out, different ways to build the same deck. But I think I have a slightly different way, slightly less consistent, slightly more powerful way of building the deck that maybe you may or may not have seen. So here's the list. So let's go through the deck. It's a ramp deck, of course. It's a Sail the Azurite Sea, Tipo, Cinderella deck. But the kind of headliner combo is with Wreck-It Ralph Raging Wrecker and Lonely Grave. So if you sack your Ralph Raging Wrecker to the Lonely Grave, you get to wipe the board of stuff that has less or equal strength to Ralph, and Ralph himself is boostable. So now Ruby gets a board clear, which is great, but more powerfully, it's a board clear where you can control what gets wiped to some degree. You can kind of make it a one-sided board clear if you control Ralph's strength well enough. And a very important feature about what makes this board clear deck good is that if you play the Lonely Grave early, like say on the same turn as Sail the Azurite Sea on turn 2, then your opposing aggro player, they're not going to be able to interact with your board clear with their Ursulas or their Mowglis, because the guy that's going to be clearing their board is Wreck-It Ralph, who is a character. This is a market improvement over Spooky Sight, it's a market improvement over Under the Sea, and I think this fact alone makes this combo definitely worth pursuing and building around, which is why we have this Ruby-Sapphire list that I've come up with. I do also want to add that it's not necessarily a combo you need to pull off in the same turn. You don't have to have Wreck-It Ralph and Lonely Grave in order for both cards to be good. In certain matchups, say against Purple Steel, Amber Ruby, matchups where basically they can't remove your Wreck-It Ralph without banishing it, playing a Wreck-It Ralph and boosting it say to 4 where it can deal with the opponent's current board and potentially their incoming board on their turn is also extremely strong, because they don't want to play anything into the combo, which means that they'll likely waste their ink on their turn, which means that on your turn, you get to have all your ink, use the Lonely Grave on the Wreck-It Ralph, remove their stuff, and then deploy more threats. It's almost like Ruby-Sapphire in the previous format, using Maleficent Dragon that's already on the board to sing Be Prepared and then playing more things. You gain a lot of tempo this way because you're basically, it's basically nullifying your opponent's turn, and then when it's your turn, when it's convenient, you then decide to banish the Ralph using the Lonely Grave. The way we control the strength of the opposing characters, and maybe Ralph as well, is with Sapphire Coil and Distracts, because these are things that can reduce the strength of the opposing characters, and then you detonate your Ralph to the Lonely Grave, wiping their side, leaving your side intact. Of course, both those strength reducing cards are great with the Headless Horseman that we know and love, and also Winterspell's new Grab Your Bow, which is a new 2-for-1 that Winterspell has introduced that I mentioned in the previous video. I think it's great. I'm playing quite a few copies. It really helps with the aggressive matchups. As regards card advantage, we're relying on Marching Off to Battle as a new Winterspell card that allows you to draw 2 cards, and it's singable by your Cinderellas, for example. If you manage to banish a character on your turn, doesn't have to be an opposing character, can also be your character, so you just throw a Tipo in there and draw 2 cards. It's a pretty decent way to bail out with your card draw. At this point, I think it's worth taking a beat to highlight just how important Marching Off to Battle is in this deck. So the reason why Ruby-Sapphire wasn't good in the set 10 metagame was that it didn't draw enough cards compared to the other decks, right? You're trying to play 7 drops, 8 drops, 9 drops. If you don't draw enough cards, you won't be able to ink enough to get to the point of your late game that your cards will be very impactful. Whereas on the opposing side, people are playing Clarabelles, people are playing Demonas, Hades. They draw like a lot of cards and are able to deploy a lot of resources quickly, such that even though you may be able to scrape your way to get to the Maleficent Dragon, at that point it's way too late for the dragon to do anything because you basically have to ink all of your cards to get there. With Marching Off to Battle, you're able to bridge from your 4 ink, 5 ink spot to get to your 6, 7, 8 ink where you can play your bigger threats with still resources in hand, and those cards are able to generate you value that can get you to the point where your Maleficent Dragons are going to be impactful. I think Marching Off to Battle is a 4-off in any Ruby-Sapphire deck, no matter how you build it. So great card from Winterspell that everyone should take a note of. And of course, Pete. Pete is great. 5 cost, 5/5, chunky body. With a boost 1, you get to draw the top card of your deck every turn. And the innovation that my friends and I came up with is David Xanatos. 6 cost, 5/5 quest for 2 from a previous set. It can kind of enable Wreck-It Ralph Raging Wrecker by questing, and then you give the Wreck-It Ralph Rush, bash something in, and then wabam, you get to destroy their board. And it's a 5/5, so it doesn't die to Ralph very easily. But it works really well with Lonely Grave because of its second line of text, where if a character of yours is banished, you draw a card. So if you have Lonely Grave on the board, a random Tipo that you don't want doesn't do anything. If you play David Xanatos, you can sack the Tipo to the Lonely Grave and cycle through another card deeper in your deck. So that's another way to use Lonely Grave that's not just tied down to Wreck-It Ralph Raging Wrecker. Even apart from Lonely Grave, David Xanatos is just very good with Wreck-It Ralph because it's a 5/5, it doesn't get banished easily to a Wreck-It Ralph trigger that you do because you generally want to trigger it at like 3 or 4 strength on the Ralph. So it will go away. You'll draw a card from the banishing of the Wreck-It Ralph. If you have Tipos or Cinderellas lying around, you draw 1 card each for those as well, which, you know, fantastic. So in Wreck-It Ralph decks, I think David Xanatos is a very core component to it, and that's why it's a 4-off in this list. The end game of the deck is of course a Maleficent Big Dragon, and the sickest tech that I saw someone else play that destroyed me, that I knew I had to put in the moment I saw it, Pete Steamboat Rival. This card crushed me because there is the new Pete Ghost of Christmas Future from Winterspell. That's a good card. It's an excuse to play this guy, and if you play this guy, it's just a better inkable Hades, which is fantastic. So the deck's chock full of synergies. You have Wreck-It Ralph and Lonely Grave. You also have Lonely Grave and David Xanatos, and also the new Belle 4-drop, which is my alternative 4-drop if you don't get to draw a Cinderella. Because Belle, when it gets banished, you add a card to your Inkwell when you're at 4, you really want more ink quickly. So the fact that it can cycle itself for ink is pretty good. And if you have it with Lonely Grave on the board, you can remove your Tipos and crummy characters in order to get more ink using Belle's effect. There's also the other synergy side with all the strength reducers like Coil, Distract, with Horseman, Grab Your Swords, and also Wreck-It Ralph, and the double Pete synergies. One shout out card that I do have to mention is Liquidator. This card is an aggro stopper. If you play it on turn 1 on the draw and your opponent start off with a Daisy Duck or whatever aggro threat, they can't quest. Saves you a lot of lore in the early game. Of course, it's a kind of a dead draw late, but at least it gets slightly better if you can give it a rush with David Xanatos, so you can throw it into something, maybe banish something, draw a card. That's pretty solid. Overall, I like the cards that I'm playing. I've been tweaking the numbers of the list depending on the metagame that I've been facing, and I will continue to do so. I used to play more anti-aggro cards. I think at one point I had 3 Grab Your Bows. I've dropped the number because I've been facing more control decks and more mid-range decks, so I wanted more larger threats. Hence, we increased the number of Steamboat Rivals in order to do that. But of course, if the reverse is true for you and you're facing a different metagame, then you can trim on the Pete synergies and just go more all-out combat aggro, because that's precisely what this Ruby-Sapphire deck is really good at doing. Destroying aggro decks because you have so much removal. Of course, with Ruby-Sapphire, we have to not just talk about the cards we're playing, we have to talk about the cards that we're not playing, right? We look at this list, it's not playing a lot of the usual hitters that you see. So I'm going to talk about some of them. The first one is Maui Half Shark, and sometimes with Mushu's Rocket. I think this is just too slow. Against aggressive decks, pulling off a combo like this is slightly too slow. A lot of the Amber decks are also now playing Horseman Strikes, which means playing a Maui Half Shark on 6 ink is just asking for trouble. Also, World's Greatest Criminal Mind kills it and you got nothing in return, so that's also kind of bad. Ultimately, I think it's too slow for too little gain, and so that's why I'm not playing Maui Half Shark. What about Let It Go? Removal, right? I said it was good. Well, it appears to me in this metagame that getting just 1-for-1 removal in a song like this is not good enough currently, without any way to recur the song with, say, Maui Half Shark, which I'm not playing. So one of the main 5 drops and up that you don't mind turning sideways in the middle game in a stalled board is your Pete. So Pete can sing Let It Go, but typically you want your Pete to be questing so that you can draw cards rather than singing a song like Let It Go, and so that's why I removed it. I think that the deck already has enough removal with the Headless Horseman, with all the strength reduction, with Grab Your Bow, with Wreck-It Ralph, with Maleficent. I didn't think I needed Let It Go as an additional removal action. It's only 1 for 1 when the rest are all generally 2 for 1s. Another notable exclusion is a Moana 5 drop from Winterspell. It is a decent card. I have tried it out. Unfortunately, it's a bit awkward because when you're playing it on 5 ink, you don't get any value. So if it gets banished by a song or something, you didn't achieve much of it. So you really want to play it on your 6 ink turn. You play Moana and then you ink something like a Develop Your Brain from your discard, but then you're kind of not using your ink fully. At that spot, I typically would rather play Pete. So where I realized I was playing Moana was when I was at 9 ink. I play Moana, ink something from my discard, and then play another 5 drop like Pete or Headless Horseman. But that's like a really small use case that I didn't think was worth the slot. And of course, there are a whole host of other cards that I have not put in, like Hades Infernal Schemer, for example. And the reason why this entire list that I'm going to display right now are not being played is because I don't have enough uninkable slots, unfortunately. If all these cards were uninkable, I would definitely play, I think, at least some number of all of them. Lady Tremaine was particularly good in doing the whole bunch of recursion, especially with Grab Your Bow and Let It Go, but because it's uninkable and it's a bit situational, it didn't make the cut. Scrooge McDuck from Winterspell, I think, is a very, very fantastic card in Ruby-Sapphire if you're going for a slightly more mid-rangey game plan. I think I Am So Cutie's list plays it. I did enjoy it a lot and in fact cut Cinderella completely for it in a different version of this deck. But in the version that wants to do the Wreck-It Ralph Lonely Grave thing, I think Cinderella's better, and it's a bit tough to have 2 different 4 drops that are both uninkable in your deck, and the one that had to go, unfortunately, was Scrooge McDuck. Scar Eerily Prepared, obviously, I love this card. It goes really well with all the banish based on strength cards, but again, it's a bit clunky. Sometimes it's not great. Dies the world's greatest criminal mind without achieving anything, so it had to go. Sisu Daring Visitor is the one that I think could see a slot in the deck if the metagame is really, really fast, because it's good against aggro, obviously. Even against mid-rangier decks that are trying to also have a game plan against aggro, like your Purple Steels and your Blurples and your Amber Rubies, Sisu's great with the damage reduction. I didn't play it because the body is a little small and primarily because it's uninkable. But if you're in a metagame where there's a lot of aggro and you treat it kind of like a brawl from previous sets, then it's pretty solid. But I just couldn't spare the uninkable slots. It just felt a bit low impact. So now we go into the deck's matchups. I think this deck's good against Amber. I really do. Even on the draw, because of the liquidators and because you have so much stuff that can remove their guys. And in the event that they're at 15 law and are presenting a lethal board, you can always have this bailout of trying to ramp up to your Lonely Grave, Wreck-It Ralph, clear the board, and restart the game from that point, albeit them with a high law total. It felt decent into all the Amethyst decks because of the Headless Horseman. You can kill their genies, you can also kill off their Dumbos and stuff with some strength reduction, and your Wreck-It Ralph combo basically clears almost everything except for Demona, but Demona is manipulable because it's 5. If you have just one distract or a Sapphire Coil trigger, it also goes away to the Wreck-It Ralph combo. Where this deck did struggle slightly was against other hard control decks. So for example, Sapphire Emerald I found to be a very, very difficult matchup, primarily because your Wreck-It Ralph doesn't do anything. You can't reliably get it to explode at 5 strength, because going up to 5 strength means probably it has to survive on the board for 1 turn, but something surviving on the board for 1 turn is not very likely against Sapphire Emerald because they have so many ways to remove your stuff. They have their Bazils, they have your Welcome, they have Mother Knows Best. They're willing to go down cards to stop this from happening. So because you have 4 or 3, depending on your version of the list, uninkables that you kind of don't really want to play, makes the matchup kind of worse. Against Sapphire Emerald specifically, going back to a version of Ruby-Sapphire that's more shark based might be better, but because I'm trying to kind of beat the lower end of the metagame, I had to give up the Sapphire Emerald matchup. It just seemed pretty tough to beat from my testing. Is this deck going to be kind of like the meta defining control deck? From my testing, I think it has a place in the metagame. If I were to make a prediction, I would think it's going to be tier 2 at the end of the day. It's going to be a playable deck that's not the top 1 or 2, but because you can tech Ruby-Sapphire to be good either against the aggro side or also good against the control side. Depending, if you're able to make a good meta call, the deck's going to perform really well. But because it's very difficult for a 60 card Ruby-Sapphire deck to be good against both fast decks, middling decks and slow decks, you're unlikely to have this deck become tier 1 in the meta game because it will definitely struggle against somewhere along the spectrum. But I think for long run meta viability, my hope is that all the really slow decks get pinned down by dogs, and so they don't flourish, don't do well, and then in that case Ruby-Sapphire have its place because it's not dead against anything that's not dogs. It's also pretty good against purple decks that also ideally would try to like to beat dogs, and it's also decent against more expensive decks as well, so long as they're not Sapphire Emerald. I'll continue to work on this list. I think it shows a lot of promise, specifically with the Wrecks Ralph combo, because it just seems really powerful from my testing. And if people are interested, maybe I'll look into doing some gameplay videos, live gameplay with this deck in local events just to see how the deck plays out. We'll see if the opportunity arrives for that. So that's it from me for this video. Thank you for sticking around to the end if you're seeing this. If you have any ideas, innovations, questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. And of course, if you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey!